How do you handle rejection? Personally, for me, I think rejection is protection. I see myself as an acquired taste. I require a man with a developed palate, a palate that has come into focus over years and years of therapy, work, and self-reflection. I know I'm not everyone's type, and I don't expect to be everyone's type. But I'm also polyamorous, and I have 4 long-term partners, so maybe I have a different reaction to rejection than most people. Now, I ask you about rejection because it's a central part of today's topic, a conversation about how men choose to react to rejection and how some men think that women should just change their environment as opposed to holding men to the standard of not being abusive. But as per usual, I am getting ahead of myself. Hi, my name is katblaque. And I like to think that I make content for introspective hot people. And if you're here, I'll assume that's you. And if you're brand new here, you know exactly what to do if this video pleases you. You just click my button and join me right here on my channel. So every day when I'm scrolling on TikTok, there's at least one video that I get from a podcast called the Grits and Eggs Podcast. It's hosted by a man named Deontay, and he makes a lot of content geared towards a Black audience, speaking about Black political issues and Black relationship family issues. I've not seen a full episode of this podcast, but Deontay seems to have a lot of really, really great things to say, really interesting things to say. If you are a Black person who is politically conscious, I would definitely say check out his podcast. Now, Deontay often has conversations that are geared towards addressing some of the red-pilled side of the internet. I want to give Deontay and men like Deontay props for trying to speak directly to men, because one of the things I will say before we get into this video is men right now are having some conversations that I think are ultimately going to not be very productive.
I shouldn't be dating a woman that's more than 2/3 of his body weight. The woman should feel smaller. He needs to feel like he could kill her, but he's not gonna. If I'm holding a girl and subconsciously she knows that if I wanted to, I could pick her up and throw her into the wall, but I'm not. She's like, okay, I trust him. He's in control.
They are conversations that I think lead us in a more antisocial direction. They're not conversations that have conclusions that are conducive to children being brought into this world or healthy, productive relationships between men and women. And increasingly in the society that we're in, I think less and less men are going to get the message that these attitudes are unhelpful and dangerous. So I applaud Deontay, especially as a Black man, for having this conversation specifically directed towards Black men. And I want to preface that because this is definitely a conversation, like a lot of Deontay conversations, that is really honed in on speaking directly to the Black community as opposed to necessarily having a more general scope. I know that I have a more general audience, and I definitely think that there are some conversations that you guys can have in this video, but I do think it's important to start before we show this. We have to establish that this was a conversation that was started because of Black men trying to have conversations with other Black men about how they treat Black women, right? And there's another conversation to be had on top of this, but that's a very specific perspective to have when we listen to this clip. So let's watch this Deontay clip.
You may not harass women. You may know how to take rejection. The majority of men that most women deal with do not.
Yeah.
And you are accountable for that as well. Because I don't got time to figure out which white people are nice, which white people aren't racist, or da-da-da-da-da. I have to go on the actions of the group. The group as a whole and the history of that group as a whole tells me that they are a danger to me and they are not to be trusted. And if you can understand that as a Black man and your stance towards white people, then you should absolutely be able to understand women's stance towards you. Mm-hmm. It's not a war on you waged by women. Actually, the war get a little thicker when we start talking about it from the perspective of a woman and the greater society of racism and white supremacy being waged against Black people, and then the patriarchal society being waged against women. So they have to deal with two elements. One of those elements we don't have to think about. And honestly, we perpetuate it. And it's perpetuated against us young to look at women as objects, you know, to look at women only through the lens of a sexual desire and not as the human being that they are. And when you understand how to deal with women on a human level, you understand how much women will enrich your life.
Amen. Amen.
You want to turn it up a notch?
Yeah.
Get you a good woman get you a good black woman in your corner.
Amen.
Hey, man, you want to see your life turn up?
Hey.
And see, this is the thing, though. It's a privilege, bro. It's a privilege. You know what I'm saying? We often disregard the power of our black women, the spiritual essence that they're gonna bring to things, the knowing, the seeing. You know what I'm saying? Also, too, imagine it. They have to be hyper vigilant because they have to be constantly scanning the room, making sure that they're in a safe situation.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? When we think about these kids who were clearly in Louisiana having the time of their fucking life because they graduated, and we think about white people's reaction to Black joy.
Oh yeah, that's
it's not about civility. It's not about decorum. They don't like to see us happy.
That's what it is.
Now, how often are women just having a good time, and here come a nigga trying to ruin their fun?
Yeah.
Let's just be honest. You can call it pandering, but if I was up here caping for white women, you wouldn't even mention that word. If I was up here caping for Hispanic women, you wouldn't even call it pandering. Only when we take pride and show love to black women do you call it pandering. Get your motherfucking mind right. Use your cabeza.
I love that because what he's saying is so true. It's so interesting the way that men envision women's experiences in life, because listening to them talk, it's like they don't know other men. Do you know what I mean? It's like they don't know other men. You know, one of the first things he says in this video is, you know, if you're a black man and you understand racism and you understand white supremacy and you have a hesitation around white people, you would understand why a woman would have a hesitation around men. You know, a lot of the conversations we end up having on here about, you know, women hating men and feminism and, you know, it's all kind of predicated on this idea that women need to stop being hesitant to judge men, right? Because some of these men they don't like to feel like they're being blamed for the bad things that other men have done. But what's frustrating about that is, if that's your experience with men, it's hard for you to even entertain the idea of good men. And, you know, that's the thing that's interesting. You know, men a lot of times will have these conversations about why it's wrong for women to generalize men. But then also, whenever we have a conversation about how men need to hold other men accountable for the bad actions of other men, it turns out that these women are afraid of these men are also afraid of these men. And so we never really end up fixing the issue. And yet men always feel like even though they don't do anything to stop it, even though they go and watch their friends do it and say nothing, women should just trust men to not be the bad guy. And it's a little frustrating because I get the idea of how wrong it may be to be generalized, right? Like, obviously, right? Like, obviously I do. But I also understand that when you're someone who's been through shit, when you're someone who's been through trauma, when you've been harmed, right? It is really, really hard for you to want to open up, for you to want to entertain the premise that maybe someone isn't going to hurt you. And, you know, I'll be frank and say that as a survivor, that has been hard for me. When you've experienced trauma, when you've been through bullshit with men, and you also feel like no one's going to defend you, it just becomes really hard for you to trust people. And I think something that a lot of men also don't calculate at all when they think of how frustrating it is for them to be on the side of that as the person who isn't being trusted. They don't think of the fact that they probably only feel entitled to an interaction that's positive with a woman because of misogyny. right? And that's kind of the thing that he was talking about as well in this video. Men are socialized to feel like they are owed women. The male loneliness epidemic is really the fact that patriarchy, in the way that it's existed historically in this country, is not getting the same return it once did. It used to be a situation where, because patriarchy was what it was, women were not able to own their own bank accounts or have their own money. So they needed to rely on men, which meant that they got married to these men. And then when they were in these marriages, they were very, very hard for them to get out. Of course, if they got out of that marriage, it would mean that they would be in a worse off situation more often than not. And so when things changed and women were able to do a little bit more, women decided that they were no longer going to be in relationships like this. And the promise that Republicans are offering to young men right now is that they will be able to go back to that era where they're able to get a lot of return back for feeding into the system of patriarchy, right? That's kind of what this is all about, right? And I think more men need to recognize that just because women exist does not mean that you are owed them. Just because they're in your proximity does not mean that they have to entertain you. But that is how a lot of men feel. And it's something I notice a lot as a trans woman because, you know, at least on paper, right, people would like to believe that no one's interested in trans women. But when I leave the house, I'm often in these scenarios where I feel beholden to these men, or men are trying to make me feel beholden to them. I'm having like conversations I don't want to have. They're cutting me off and cornering me in a way I don't really want to be cut off and cornered. And there's this way that, you know, I'm constantly being encouraged to increase the value of the space by my presence or my smile, right? Smile, sweetheart is all about men who think, oh, this woman is outside and she's not smiling, she's not looking pleasant. That makes me feel a certain way. You need to service my personal feeling about that and smile, sweetheart. That's what it's all about. It all comes from this deeply misogynistic, patriarchal view of how society is supposed to function, where women in public are supposed to service men, right? And this is a conversation to have, because if you understand that, and you're a man who wants to be in relationships, you're able to sort of see through the way that you're encouraged to maybe do some of these things that are hurtful to others. And you're maybe able to pursue a relationship that's a little bit healthier. You're able to pursue women in more appropriate context, you know? And the thing is, ever since I've been on the internet having conversations about feminism, I've had conversations about how certain men can't get laid. For a lot of men, that is like when they get political. It really begins and ends with, I'm not getting laid. I need to get laid. Women need to have sex with me. Why aren't women having sex with me? And it's funny because, of course, you know, what is it that they always think that trans folks are doing? They always imagine that that's what we're doing, is we're saying, fuck me. Why don't you fuck me? It's actually, we don't need to do that. Like I said, 4 boyfriends do not need to do that. And that's the thing too. A lot of men, I don't think, calculate that, you know, you may be feeding into this bullshit, but there are men out there who don't. You know, there are plenty of men out there who don't feed into this toxic bullshit. And if you see those men with women, it's not because of some weird soy boy conspiracy theory where women just want feminized men. It's because some men have figured out that you can be masculine and also not abuse women, right? They have unpacked toxic masculinity and developed a recognition that it can exist beyond that, right? So unfortunately, I think a lot of men aren't going to get that message, and that's why they're not going to be able to breed, right? And that's the thing. A lot of these men, girl, we're getting off on a tangent, right? They want to breed, but the specimen is questionable. Anyway, Deontay Kyle's video started a lot of discourse, and it specifically reached the feed of a user named John Cannon. John Cannon is another very well-known social media figure. He's got a pretty big page. I get his videos every once in a while. not necessarily always my thing, but I did see this video when it came into my feed organically, and it did start a lot of controversy. And that is kind of why I wanted to talk about this video, because he says some stuff in this video that I think is really worth examining and unpacking.
This whole Deante Kyle, men are accountable for the men who are terrible bullshit is really opened up a train of thinking for me, and I really got to get this out. It seems as if women want to perfect the social environment instead of existing within it. And what I mean by that is, like, imagine a hunter goes into the woods, and instead of accepting the fact that there's bears and mosquitoes and old trees that might fall and dangers, instead of him accepting that, he starts complaining. Why are there bears out here? Oh my God, why are the mosquitoes biting? Instead of choosing to stay indoors and go live in the city and buy your meat out of a market. Follow me. I'm a bad person if I say, if you don't like those environments and the negative things that come with those environments, stay out of those environments. I have never been to a club in my entire life. I have never been to a strip club, a hookah lounge, a bar in my entire life. I have lived a very intentional life. I went from my mother's daycare to elementary school, to middle school, to high school, to college, and to work. Within there, I was a little gym ratty. I played sports. I did this and that. That's how I got my social interaction on. And that's how most people do get their social interaction on. We have these very large conversations about a very small amount of people. And again, I just do want to reiterate, if you don't like the negative experiences that come along with the environments you like to be in, don't try to change said environment. It's too big. There's too many variables. There's too many people to depend on lining up with your personal moral code. Instead, remove yourself from said environments. Why am I having a conversation about what happens at the club? Why are we regular people with 9-to-5 jobs having full-blown discourse and conversations about what happens when a woman rejects a man in the club and he like, you ugly anyway, bitch? Why are we talking about that? Most of us don't even participate in that. Most of us, I would like to say that if you're a married man, woman, why the fuck are you in the strip club, the club, a bar? What are you do? Go to a nice dinner. Sit at the house. Be grown. I don't know, bro. Maybe I'm tweaking.
Yeah, definitely on some meth there. Let's talk about this, because I've got multi-layered reactions to this. So, as you guys know, one of the things that makes my brain funky is I was raised very conservative. And there's always a little bit of that in the back of my brain. I think sometimes that makes it so that I have a more well-rounded view of certain things. And so I wanted to kind of share some of my like immediate conservative thoughts, because when I watch his video, his vibe reminds me of how I used to be. Some of you guys may, you may have just met katblaque, the, weirdo who goes to goth clubs, but some of you met katblaque, the failing housewife living in Orange County who used to define herself as someone who didn't go out. Right? So I remember when I was younger, hadn't seen a lot of the world, hadn't experienced a lot of things, I would always envision clubs and, bars as the places where the bad things happen. And if you follow me, if you've seen any of my videos, if you've listened to any of my conversations about sexual violence, you know that yes, I have definitely experienced sexual violence and other really uncomfortable things in those environments more than just a few times, right? So it's not as if that thought didn't come from somewhere. What that mentality allows you to do is you see the sin as something that happens in this bad place. And there are bad people who go to this bad place and they do these bad things, and they all come together because they're doing this bad stuff, right? And so people like John will say it's silly to assume that when you're in a bad place with bad people that bad things won't happen to you. And that feels like a truth, right? But here's the reality of it. Now, I don't know, maybe Deontay Kyle, there's like a longer part of that clip that I might have missed. But Deontay Kyle, from the clip that we just watched, was not talking about nightclubs and bars. He was talking about rejection between men and women, something that happens in a lot of places. And unfortunately, the reality is for women, we are more likely to experience sexual violence from someone that we know who lives in our home than someone who we meet out on the street. And really, this idea of the scary, sinful, bad person that's going to hurt you in the scary, sinful, bad place, that idea has allowed a lot of people who come from slightly more conservative backgrounds to hide a lot of the abuse that happens in their ranks, right? They're able to hide a lot of the bad things that happen right around them because, of course, they're not as bad as the bad people over there doing the bad thing in the bad place. That's one of the biggest things that I wanted to say, is that a lot of times when women have trauma around their interactions with men, they're not talking about strangers. They're not talking about people they don't know. They're not talking about that time that they were rejected in a bar and someone said, oh, go fuck you, bitch, or whatever. They are literally talking about how they were harmed by a man that they had every reason to trust. And you have to think about that violation too. You have to think about that. The reason why that violation hits so hard is because of the men you're supposed to trust as a woman. It should be someone in your family, right? If you're supposed to trust any man, it shouldn't be some stranger on the street, right? It should maybe not even be an intimate partner, right? It should always more solidly be your family. And so to have that trust betrayed, especially by someone who frequently may be one of your first examples of what a man is supposed to be, how is that not going to negatively impact your vision of men? And what frustrates me about the way people respond negatively to that is it's just so callous to judge someone for experiencing trauma at the hands of a man and then expect for them to get over it really quickly so that you can have a positive interaction with them. We don't have that mentality without misogyny. We don't have that mentality without a culture that has a deep-seated hatred for women and for their ability to define themselves and set their own parameters. When I walk down the street and go to get food for myself at the corner store, I'm probably going to deal with a group of men yelling something out at me that is sexual. That is just part of my life. I have to prepare for the fact that when I leave the house, men are going to objectify me and say something to me, right? There's not a place where I can go outside of my home where that's not a possibility. It is a possibility in literally every single environment. So functionally, what you are asking women to do is never leave their home because men can't control themselves. Like, that is functionally what you're asking women to do, is to literally never interact with men outside of the home. And, going back to, my conservative brain, this is actually what conservative men feel. For conservative men, that is their goal for their wives, right? They never leave the house. They never leave home. They never interact with other people because other people could potentially flirt with them, right? Every single context where I'm outside of my home interacting with other people is a context where a man could objectify me, harm me, or do something otherwise uncomfortable to me. I actually can't control that. And it frustrates me how frequently men do this, where they will blame women for the behaviors of men, right? Like, here's the reality, right? Bars and clubs may be unsafe. They may be places where people have lower inhibitions and are acting out. But a woman should be able to go to a bar and a club and expect that she's not going to be assaulted. And when you throw your hands up and say, well, that's just how things are, really what you're doing as a man is making the argument that men at their core are so inherently predatory that they cannot control themselves. That's the thing that's so interesting to me about the red pill mindset. Red-pilled men are simultaneously very, very strong, stronger than any person could ever be, but so weak that they could not handle a woman existing near them who could potentially get their dick hard. It's really weird. It's really, really weird, right? Men should be able to control themselves, and other men should be able to tell those men to control themselves. Because again, to my point that I made earlier, men are not going to listen to women. They should. They really should. But even when the conversation is what do women want in relationships, they still listen to men. You know what I mean? Like, men are going to default to other men under a patriarchal society that sees women's ideas as not as valuable. So to really bring it all together, every situation where I'm outside of my home and I'm interacting with another person is a situation where I could be harmed by a man. And also at the same time, I'm more likely to be assaulted by someone in my own home that I know, that's in my family, right? Like, do you understand that that's the reality of it? So you could try to lay the blame for it all at the feet of women, but in all reality, it doesn't matter what a woman does. Men are actually going to be the ones who require the change of other men. That's the only way this is going to move forward. But what men are saying at large right now is that they're not going to do it. And again, it is a really fascinating thing to observe because, you know, within my circles, right? Like my sex positive, polyamorous, we're all trying to be kinder to each other circles. I know so many people who have functional relationships. And, a lot of these relationships are ones where everyone kind of accepts that these roles that we were kind of encouraged to play are not natural to us, that maybe sometimes one person plays the other role, and that's not the way society typically likes to see it, but that's the way that they come together and mesh with each other, right? Like, there are so many men who are trapped in society's general view of them and how masculine or not masculine they are, that they literally are allowing themselves to be in a situation where they are harming women and being indifferent to the harm of women, and yet also feeling as if women should be interested in procreating with them. And that is not a mentality that ultimately leads us to that conclusion. Men standing up for women is huge, massive. I hear what John is saying in terms of, he doesn't do that sort of stuff. He doesn't go to those places or do those things, but he's missing the point, which is that this shit happens everywhere. And at the end of the day, if this is going to change, it is going to require that men require that change of other men. When men respond negatively to rejection, it's typically because they exist in a system that tells them that they are owed women, that they are owed access to women, any women that they find attractive. And if I'm being honest, something that I'm starting to become a little bit more aware of is that more men are kind of moving through the world with this sort of mindset where they really do think that what Trump is doing right now is going to put them into a position where they can just kind of come and get every woman that they want. And it's so sad to me that so many men lack imagination enough to see beyond the sort of baseline conclusions that they're supposed to reach because of patriarchy. So that's what I had to say about this. I'm very curious to know what you guys have to say about this, so please let me know in the comment box below. Also, before I go, I wanted to thank the last 3 members of my Patreon. Shout out to Spencer Garland, Navy, and Finn Bannon. Thank you so much for joining my Patreon. I have some exclusive content that is only on Patreon, and I also have some exclusive content that is also available for my members only. There are a little bit of a difference between what you can get on YouTube memberships versus Patreon. The big difference between the YouTube membership and the Patreon membership is that on YouTube, I'm also giving you guys access to some of my previous videos from a couple of years ago that I had archived. And on Patreon, I am mostly uploading more recent content, a lot of extra content, and also posting my videos basically as I finish them. And now is a pretty good time to join because I am a little bit ahead of schedule. As of now, there are 2 videos that are posted up there. There is a video of comment reply as well. And I'm also going to be working on another one of those later today. So by the time you guys see this video, there will probably be a few of those. So right now is a really, really great time to join my Patreon and my YouTube members. So if you're curious about that, you guys can find out how to do so in the box below. Anyway, on that note, I will talk to you guys next time, and I want you to always remember and to never forget that you are beautiful and you are loved. Bye.